Hello and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name's Kat and this is a channel where I like to talk about books and ideas, and today I'm going to be talking about the fiction books that I read in April. So unlike last month, where I felt like I had a lot of really good books that I just really felt very strongly about, this month I think it was one book that I have really very much enjoyed and I am like really ready to read the sequel as soon as I can get my hands on it. And then the other books kind of range from fine to good, but not as good as they could have been, and we'll get into why that is. But as we've been doing on all of my fiction reading wrap-ups, we're going to do a little recap on my kind of stats and goals and how I'm progressing against those goals, and then we'll get into the books. So in terms of my goals for this year, they were to read more sequels, to read more of the books on my shelves from my physical TBR, to read all of the books on my 2025 TBR, and to read the books that come in my book subscription. So in terms of those goals, we have, I think, 8 books to talk about here. 4 of them are graphic novels, and I'm just going to talk about them all at once because they're all part of the same series. But I think it is 8 books in total. 5 of them are sequels, although 3 of them were from that graphic novel series. So we have 5 sequels, 1 standalone, 2 starts, 2 series, 1 book from my 2025 TBR, and 0 books from my book subscription because it took me a while to get through that book. It was a bit of a chunky one, but I am finished with it now, but I finished it kind of like into May. But anyway, I'm still pretty happy with the balance of my books, so let's get into talking about them. So the first book I have to talk about this month is one that I did technically finish in May, but like at the end of April, I had about 50 pages left, and so we're counting it in this reading wrap up. So this is Under Loch and Key by Lana Ferguson. So in this book, we're following Kiana, or Key, and before the start of this book, her father passes away, and so she decides to go to his native Scotland to look up her estranged grandparents and to scatter his ashes. So Key kind of lost herself when her father got ill and when he died, and so as part of her healing, she decides that she wants to seek out her family and her father's homeland, and she's never met her grandparents because her father ran off to America, I think, before she was born. So this is all very new to her, and she just kind of like shows up at their farm in Scotland. And while she's there, she meets this hot, grumpy farmhand who works on her grandparents' farm, but seems to have some kind of ulterior motive for wanting to hang around this farm. And as Key gets to know him, she starts to learn that there might be some truth to the stories that her father used to tell her about the Loch Ness Monster. So I was really excited for this book because I read The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson in last year, I think it was, and that was a fun book. It was largely a contemporary romance, but there was this kind of like paranormal, supernatural shifter element, but it was very much like more of a medical romance than it was that, but it was fun. I liked it. And so when I heard this book was coming out, I heard the premise for it, I thought it was fun. I don't think that it is a secret from the marketing or from the description or anything like that. He's Nessie. He is the Loch Ness Monster. I pulled Nessie down for this because I thought it'd be fun. But yeah, he is the Loch Ness Monster, and I thought that was a fun concept to basically have a contemporary romance where one of the characters is Nessie. So yeah, obviously this has some supernatural elements to it, and they weren't particularly well developed, but also, even though I read a lot of fantasy, I don't feel like I am a fantasy snob where if it's not a super compelling magic system or something like that, that I'm gonna be bent out of shape about that. I can suspend my disbelief, whatever. Like, if it's a good romance, if it's a good connection, if they're interesting characters, I'm fine with it. It's cool if it's not like the most fantastical, amazing fantasy world or twist or whatever. But that being said, not only was the fantasy kind of just like super basic, but the characters weren't particularly compelling. It did really feel like the connection they had was the sort of connection that sometimes characters in romances have, where it's like, we're 2 characters in a romance book, therefore we need to like each other, and that's almost the premise of their relationship and their attraction to each other. And so all that to say, this wasn't particularly good. I think it was kind of middling. It was fine, but I expected more from it because I did like previous books by this author in a similar vein more than this. So a bit lackluster, but all around an okay time. The next book we're going to talk about is actually a graphic novel series. This is called, I think, My Happy Marriage, and this is a kind of like Cinderella-esque historical Japan, slightly fantasy series. So I got these from my library, and I basically like binged the first 4 volumes, which was all my library had, in an afternoon, and they were fun. It was a fun way to spend an afternoon. So this series follows Mio. She is a young woman living in a kind of like historical Japan, but there's this whole fantasy element where some people have powers and the powers are passed down through families, and so there's this whole politics and power dynamics of like families arranging marriages between children in order to try to condense power in these families, and this whole like proximity to the emperor kind of deal. There's a lot going on in here, but I do think that the fantasy element is relatively low profile, at least for the first few volumes that I read. So anyway, Mio is living in this world. She's a young woman of like marriageable age, but despite the fact that both of Mio's parents have these powers, Mio is basically powerless, and so she's not very highly valued in terms of like a marriageable prospect, if that makes sense. So when she was a child, her mother died and her father remarried, and her stepmother and her stepsister are very mean to her and treat her as a servant, but there's this fun twist that her father is also still alive and lets them treat her this way. So basically her entire family are assholes. And so in the series, she is sent off to live with this scary guy. He's very powerful. He's a captain in the military or something like that. But there have been like half a dozen women who have gone to his house to try to be betrothed to him, but they've all been booted out after like a week. And so Mio is thinking there's no way that he's going to want to put up with me because he kicked all of these women out. But she also knows that if she gets booted out of this guy's house, her parents won't take her back, and so she'll have nowhere to live. And so she's like, I kind of gotta make this work. So she gets to this guy's house. Obviously things are a bit different than what she expected. There's obviously this Cinderella element to it, and then there is the whole like politics around the powers and the arranged marriages and all of that kind of stuff, and that all plays into it, but I won't talk any more about that because of spoilers. So this was cute. I binged the first 4 volumes in an afternoon. If I'd had more to read from, I probably would have read them, so I'm gonna see if I can get my library to get the other 4, which I think there are 8 in total that have been published in English. But it was a good time. It was a good way to spend an afternoon. It was an interesting world. I liked the kind of like historical Japan elements. Mio as a character kind of annoyed me at the beginning. She was very deferential and kind of pathetic, and I do think that some of that was kind of cultural. Obviously Japan is a very honor-based society. It's very normal to be deferential to someone of a kind of higher status than you, and this is historical. She's a woman, all that kind of stuff, and so her like kneeling and being a little too apologetic and all that kind of stuff is like maybe a bit normal considering the situation she was in, the society she was in, all of that. And she obviously grows a little bit more of a backbone. That's probably not a spoiler, but there is some character development later on, and she, you know, grows a little bit of a spine. But for a lot of the first book, I was just like, where are we going with this? Because she's very pathetic. I don't want to like be mean about that, but you know, it was a bit like too much with how she acted at the beginning. But once I kind of like got into the context and the setting and all that kind of stuff, it made a bit more sense. I was able to give her a little bit more grace as a character. And also I think the fact that these were graphic novels and that we got past that stage sort of quickly helped my enjoyment of this, and that, you know, we were able to progress fairly quickly into her development. So overall, this was a fun time. I enjoyed it. I do think there's also like a series adaptation that I found on Netflix about this, so you can go watch it on Netflix as well if you don't want to or can't read the books. So yeah, it was a cute little series, and I wouldn't say no to reading the rest of it. I don't know if I would necessarily say I would recommend this as a series, but it was a fine way to pass an afternoon. The next book we have is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart, and that is The Ballad of Never After. I never remember the names of these ones. I know Once Upon a Broken Heart, but this one and the last one, is it A Curse for True Love, maybe? They kind of feel a little bit word salad-y. Anyway, moving on. In this book, we are following Evangeline, and in the first book, Evangeline was supposed to get married to this guy, but then her stepsister stole him, and so they're getting married, and she kind of runs off to a church or a temple or something and goes to pray to a fate to like stop the wedding, and he does, and then people get turned to stone, and then they unget turned to stone, and then she runs off to the Magnificent North. I honestly don't remember a ton of like the finer details of how the first book in this series went, and again, like the other ones, I do not reread the first in the series before picking up the sequel, despite the fact that I probably should. So I remember some of the basic plot beats, I remembered who a lot of the characters were, but there were some of like the finer details that I was just like, what are we doing here? Anyway, so this is another one that's very kind of like fairy tale-esque, whimsical, and Cinderella-y in a way, where she is kind of like going to this Cinderella-esque ball in order to meet the prince or something like that. And I don't know if she hopes to get married or if she's just kind of like there for the vibes, but in the first book she meets the prince, and I won't say anything more about that because of spoilers. So in this book we are kind of following up from that, and I felt like this book was kind of middle book syndrome-y in that it seemed more like a bridge between the first book book and the third book in the trilogy. And so while there was some stuff that happened, while there was like a goal and a climax and like things that happened, I don't want to say that like it was all filler, but there were some parts that I was just like, it kind of feels like a bit of filler. That being said, I did have a good time with this. Like, I did generally enjoy this as a book. I enjoyed the characters. Evangeline she's a bit of a goody two-shoes. She's one of those characters that almost seems like a bit of a caricature. She's almost like too sweet and too nice, and people take advantage of her a lot. And I think both of the books are kind of her growing a bit more of a spine. But despite the fact that that kind of character tends to really annoy me, I was not as annoyed as I think I usually am at characters like her, and so I generally had a good time with this. It was very whimsical, very fairy tale, it was very whimsical, very fairy tale-esque. I can say that. We're gonna pretend I said that. Whimsical book. And I generally enjoyed it. It was a very easy read, definitely. And so if you're looking for just, again, a kind of a fun way to pass the time, this is a decent series for that. And I remember really enjoying some of the world building elements of the first book, which again, I can't remember the finer points of, but I remember like descriptions and stuff and just being like, oh, this sounds really nice. So this was a good time. I'm looking forward to reading the third book. It's also on my shelf. I want to pick it up hopefully by the end of the year because I read the first book in like 2023, so it's been 2 years. That's why I didn't remember anything. It's been 2 years. I want to finish off this trilogy before I forget everything that happened in here, because I do think that while I did take a while to get back into this book, when I was in and I was like there with the characters. So I definitely want to kind of continue on that trajectory in the next few months. So good book. Had a good time, would probably recommend, but like not the most spectacular thing in the world. And I say that because I know this is definitely a book internet favorite, and I'm maybe a bit middling about it, but we'll see when I get to the end. Maybe it'll be a bit more impactful. Anyway, it was a good time. Moving on. So the next book is another sequel to a book that I read back in 2023. This is A Curse of Sins. This is A Curse of Sins, which is the sequel to A Curse of Saints. And in the first book, we are following Aya. She in the first book, Aya is the spy master of her kingdom, and I don't think it's really a spoiler because it's called A Curse of Saints, but she is revealed to be a saint at the beginning of the first book, and because of that, she has like more powers. And so in this world, it kind of reminds me of the Grishaverse. I think they're called Visya, and there's like different orders, and in some countries the Visya are like really well regarded, and in other countries they're met with more suspicion, and there's often like military sections that have certain types of Visya and like different ways that they're used and all that kind of stuff. So like I said, if you've read anything in Lee Bardugo's Grishaverse, it's a kind of similar setup in terms of the magic system and who has magic, and also some of the kinds of magic that they have. And the first book is kind of like her and her colleague slash rival Will, who is the Queen's enforcer, going across the ocean and trying to get help from this friendly kingdom because there is another kingdom on their same continent that wants to like kill everyone with dark magic or something. And so because she has been revealed to be the saint, things are going to be set in motion, and so they know that they have to get help for this war that's going to come, and so they're going to get this help from this other kingdom. And then also I think she's like training her powers in the first book, and then this book is going off of what happened in the first book, which I can't really go into because of spoilers. But again, kind of like The Ballad of Never After, I had to look at the book again because I forgot the effing name. Again, kind of like that book, I forgot a lot of the finer details of what had happened in the first book, which for this I think was worse because there was a lot of politics that happened in this that I actually was able to get back into, but also I still don't remember a lot of what happened in the first book, so I think it would have hit harder if I had read them closer together. There's definitely a lot going on in here. There's a lot of politics, a lot of like moving parts, and I think it was pretty interesting. I think this is a pretty solid series. There's obviously a romantic element if you can't tell from the cover, but it was a really good time, and I really enjoyed this. And so I don't know when the next book is coming out because there's definitely going to be another one. I don't know if it's a trilogy or if it's going to go farther than that, but I did enjoy it. Solid series, good for if you like the Grishaverse, if you generally like fantasy or romantasy for that matter, and you also like some like political intrigue and some kind of interesting magic. I will say that I don't think the magic system is probably like the most unique, but it's fun and it's fine. So this is not like selling this book, but I did generally enjoy it. And you know, it was like 600 pages and I kept reading it, so it was at least enjoyable enough to like keep me going with that. I don't think I've heard a lot of people talking about this, and so you know, you might consider picking up the first one, seeing how you like it. The second one's out now. By the time you finish them both, the third might be out. Who knows? So yeah, that was that. And then the last book I have to talk about in this video was definitely my favorite book of this month, and that was Of Jade and Dragons. So in this book we're following Ying. Ying is a young woman who lives in this village with her father and her siblings, and her father is like the village head, and he is also an engineer and has sparked in Ying a love of just like inventing and tinkering with things and making her own creations and all of that kind of stuff. And so she has an interest in engineering, but of course, because this is a kind of historical Asia-based fantasy world, engineering isn't really for girls. People in the village kind of look at her funny, but because of who her father is, she's allowed to do whatever she wants and tinker in her father's workshop and just have a good time making inventions. However, at the beginning of the book, her father dies. He is killed violently, and Ying is with him in his last moments, and some things happen that lead her to suspect that the person or people responsible for her father's death might be at the Engineers Guild in the capital city, where her father used to be a member, but then kind of ran off to the countryside. So she travels to the capital, disguises herself as a boy, and enters these trials to become an engineering apprentice in order to investigate why these people might have wanted her father dead. So I really enjoyed this book. I wasn't really sure what to expect from it, but I had such a good time. So this is steampunk, and there's an author's note at the beginning of what that was, which is basically Asian steampunk, and I really enjoyed that element of it, the invention, the engineering aspect, the fact that she is pretending to be a boy, the kind of mayhem that ensues from that, and some of the just like funny bits that always happen when there's a storyline of a girl disguising herself as a boy, especially in that kind of like adolescent phase. All of that was very fun. I think this is YA, and so there's definitely some of that coming of age aspect, her trying to learn how to live without her father, without his protection and his guidance, and like being her own person. There's definitely some character development there, and I had such a good time with this. And so I think this is going to be a duology. I think that the second book is coming out in June, I want to say, and so I pre-ordered that, so I'm very much looking forward to reading that. I think I'm going to put that on my summer TBR and try to like tackle that as soon as I can close to reading this, because I remember getting to the end of this and just being like, where's book 2? So I'm really glad that I read it when I did, so that I can go straight into book 2 pretty soon after I read it. So this was a good time. It was a really fun read. I really enjoyed the world. I enjoyed Ying as a character. I enjoyed the shenanigans she got up to, and I'm looking forward to reading book 2 and yeah, seeing where these characters are going. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, this is one I would definitely recommend. So those are all the books for this video. I feel like I didn't have a ton to say about a lot of them. I'm honestly wondering if I'm in a reading slump, because a lot of the books I read this month were fine. I enjoyed them fine, but I didn't have any like great loves this month, and I don't know if that's a me problem or if it's a them problem, or maybe it just wasn't a great reading month. And that's okay. Anyway, my mental problems aside, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've gotten this far in the video, let me know if there are any books that you read in April that you particularly enjoyed. I'd love to see what other people are reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, and if you'd like to see more from me in the future, please subscribe. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thanks very much. Bye.